Before we look at what the teacher of Ecclesiastes has to say, let me share with you one of my holiday disappointments. I'm sure you've all had holiday disappointments. When you plan for a holiday, you plan for a great time, but then it all kind of goes pear-shaped, and you really end up with a great sense of disappointment. If you had a holiday moment like that, maybe a whole holiday like that, I don't know. There was a time when I was studying theology in preparation for the ministry where a group of 5 of us, fellow students, we decided one summer to hop in a car and drive down to Victoria and take a tour along the Great Ocean Road. You ever done that tour? Of course, the highlight is the 12 Apostles. That's right, that's the highlight, the 12 Apostles. And I had in my mind an image of the picture I was going to take as the sun rose up over the water, as the golden rays hit that golden sandstone. I thought this is going to be a great picture, set there against the deep blue of the ocean. And so in the dark, before dawn, we got up and we hopped in the car, we left our campsite, we went out to the 12 Apostles and we waited for the sun to rise. The sky got lighter, but no sun appeared. Until at one point, one of our number looked at her watch and she said, well, it's well past sunrise now, where's the sun? What had happened was that in the early morning gloom, we hadn't realised just how overcast the day was. There was a lot of cloud, there was a lot of haze, there was a lot of mist, and there was no sun. So there was no golden photo opportunity. The thing I had planned for weeks beforehand, that didn't come about. And I remember having this great sense of disappointment, thinking to myself, it's the first time I've been here, quite possibly it may be the last time I'm here, and I've missed out on the thing that my heart was set upon. A great sense of disappointment. Maybe you've had an experience like that on one of your holidays. Now, if I were to relate that story to the teacher who we meet in Ecclesiastes, I am sure he would nod his head and he would say, yes, that's what life is like. You plan for great things, you want to achieve great things, and then it just ends up in bitter disappointment. Get used to it, buddy. That's what life is like. I'm sure that's what the teacher of Ecclesiastes would say, because this is a person who is just relentlessly pessimistic. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher in chapter 1, verse 2. Utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. Not the kind of guy you'd want to find yourself sitting next to at a dinner party. The negativity of some people can be draining, can't it? And this is one negative individual. Verse 3. What do people gain from all their labours at which they toil under the sun? I feel like saying to him, come on, man, cheer up. Cheer up, buddy. Look on the bright side of the life. Surely there's something a little more positive you can say about this life that you're living under the sun. But no, he has a lot of negative things to say. Maybe one way of looking at his teaching is to see him not so much as a pessimist, but as a realist. A brutally honest realist. He's seeking to be honest about the human condition, and in doing so, he actually does us a little bit of a favour. Sometimes people say in business, you need to learn to ask about the brutal facts. You need to learn the brutal truth, because that will enable you to work out a clear path forward. And so maybe this is how we can think of the teacher here in Ecclesiastes. He's being brutally honest, and that can be a help for us because it helps us work out, helps us locate where true and lasting hope can be found, rather than relying on the shallow and false hopes that come with a very superficial outlook on life. He's trying to convince us that the world we experience, life as it's lived under the sun, that's what that phrase means. You'll hear that repeated all the way through Ecclesiastes. The world as we experience it has a dark edge to it. And he wants us to see that darkness, I think, so we can discover what the best approach to life is. I think that's the project that he's undertaking here. So in today's passage, he presents a number of arguments that seek to awaken us if we haven't been awake to it already, to seek to awaken us to the darkness that's here in this world. Because it's only when we're being honest that a clear path can be discerned. So the first argument is that as he looks out on the world, he observes the world to be a series of endless cycles. Cycle after cycle after cycle after cycle. Verse 5, the sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north, round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. It's interesting that there in verse 7, he describes the water cycle. And not the only place in the Bible where the water cycle is described. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. The water cycle is just one of many endless cycles that we find within nature. It's his first observation. Nature is full of these endless cycles. And what's true in the realm of nature is also true in the area of human activity. Verse 9. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, there is something new? It was here already, long ago. It was here before our time. Now, at this point, we might challenge the teacher, mightn't we? With all the wonderful advances in technology that have happened over the last few decades or so, we might say, well, there are plenty of examples of things that are new. The internet, for example, that is new. It wasn't with us 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Well, the internet is a revolution in communication technology, but it's not the first revolution in communication technology that the human race has encountered. The invention of the printing press in the 16th century, that changed the world. It changed politics, it changed religion, it changed the way people think. It was an information revolution. Even the invention of writing was a revolution. Socrates, the Greek philosopher, was a little bit down on the written word. He thought the invention of writing took humanity backwards a few steps because it meant that we didn't have to exercise our memories in the same way, because you don't need to remember things when you see it written down. So even the invention of writing was a revolution of sorts. So we might think the internet, it's new, but really, is it that new? It's one more revolution, and we've had a number of these throughout all of human history. Even if we do a tremendous job in using the technology of the day, even though we might enable ourselves to put our mark on the time and place that God has placed us, make an impact, it will be forgotten in a relatively short period of time. Verse 11, no one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. There's an interesting exercise you can do. Can you name all of your great-grandparents? Can you name them? It's only 3 generations ago. Can you tell someone when it is that each of them was born, their birthdays? I mean, you know the names of the people in your family, you know the birth dates of the people in your family. We all love to have our names remembered. We all love to have our birthdays celebrated by the ones we love. But our presence in this world will not be remembered beyond 100 years or so. Our descendants, their memory will not, their focus will not be on us. Their focus will be on other things. We'll be lucky if they remember our names. As the teacher said in verse 3, generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. Now, the earth will outlive each one of us. Even if at this point in time, maybe human activity is making a change to the way our earth operates. But still, the earth is not about to disappear. Not about to disappear. And so this observation of endless repetitive cycles leads the teacher to a sense of dismay. Why bother? What is actually achieved by all our work? And we might say again to the teacher, but hang on, we may not be remembered, but at least we can make the world a better place for the people who follow us. Even though they might not know who we are, we can make the world a better place for them if we kind of get busy and do something useful. Well, not necessarily. I don't know what the next generation will do with our work. We have no way of ensuring that our legacy is honoured and put to good use. We don't know how long the gains of our current culture will last. Knowledge and technology can be lost. The Egyptians were able to achieve wonderful things, and we still don't know how they did it. We still don't. It's not only the pyramids I'm talking about, but wonderful artefacts have come out of ancient Egypt. We don't know how they were made. Beautiful stone vessels, which look as if they were turned on a wheel, like a potter might turn some clay. But they're not made of clay, they're made of stone. We don't know what technology they used to create these wonderful things. We could probably replicate it today with our modern machinery, but the Egyptians didn't have access to this. They had a knowledge which has been lost. And there are voices currently today who are saying that our Western democracy is in danger of being lost. And these aren't conspiracy theorists either. These are well-regarded people. Just this week I heard that the Dean of the Law School at the University of Queensland saying that perhaps Western democracy is facing a fall of Rome moment. He's noticed a number of things within our culture which startle him, which in his study of history he's seen as being precursors to the end of empires. What we have now may not last. There is a series of cycles within human history. The teacher of Ecclesiastes has seen this, and he wants to convict us that this may be something that's ahead of us. And he's just beginning. I mean, it's not very cheery so far, is it? The book of Ecclesiastes, but the teacher, he's just beginning. These observations have stirred his interest, and so he buckles down to do some further study to work out for sure whether life really is that meaningless. He's going to test a number of hypotheses. He's got a few candidates in mind, potential avenues by which we might be able to find true meaning, maybe. So he's going to test it. At verse 12, he says, I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I applied my mind to study and explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. This is a top-level investigation that the teacher is embarking upon. He has the resources of a kingdom at his disposal, so he's going to channel them into this series of investigations that he's about to get underway. The first candidate is knowledge itself. Could meaning be found in the act of study, in the collection of great wisdom? Is that one way that we can find meaning? This is a path that more and more of us in our current society, more and more of us are taking this path. Is it true? The teachers in the congregation might be able to tell me, but the school certificate is no longer held. Is that right? At the end of Year 10? No longer held. Because more and more students are going on to Year 12. More and more students are extending their education. Tertiary education is big business in our country. You know, it's our 4th largest export. Tertiary education, 4th largest export. There is a market for education, but does it bring meaning? People are investing in it. Does it bring meaning? That's the question that the teacher has for us. What has the teacher discovered about the life of learning? Verse 16. I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom. More than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me, I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly, but I learnt that this too is a chasing after the wind. The teacher's conclusion from this first round of investigation is that life's meaning is not found in great learning. In fact, his opinion is that there is a futility that follows on from great amounts of study. Because, verse 18, with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. The more we learn about the world, he says, the more reasons we have to fall into despair. We see this in our internet age. When I'm online and I'm looking at the news websites, a common article that I'm seeing being published again and again and again is that kind of article which tells you how to speak to your children when they see bad news on the internet. They might hear something bad on the radio, they might see something disturbing on the television, see something online. How do you speak to your children when they encounter terribly shocking news? Now, why is such an article necessary? It's because young people have so much access to information and they are being bombarded by bad news, swimming in a sea of it. That's why that kind of article is necessary. There is deep theological significance in the teacher's observation here. In verse 13, the teacher exclaims, what a heavy burden God has laid on humankind. It's a little reflection of what we learn in Genesis chapter 3. Because of sin, the world is under a curse. Our place within the world is marked by difficulty and trial and hardship. And so the more we study the world, the more we learn about the effects of sin, the more we learn how broken it is. That's why a proper, sober view of the world will see those dark shadows. And that will not only give rise to sorrow within our hearts, but it will also maybe give us a hint as to where true hope can be found. Found in the answer to sin, you see. That's where true hope can be found. But before we speak of that, the teacher's investigation continues. If knowledge and wisdom don't cut it, what about the good life? What about living the good life? Maybe that's something which will help us find meaning. If we want to live out the good life, there are a number of different ways we can do that, a number of different avenues. Seeking out pleasure is one method. Chapter 2, verse 1. So I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. So the teacher gives himself permission to go on a real bender. The teacher has his own schoolies week, in effect. He seeks out laughter. He cheers himself with wine. He embraces folly. In the second half of verse 8, he says he acquires male and female singers, so he throws entertainment into the mix. And of course, promiscuous sex, a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. It's interesting. That's a useful little bit of wisdom in itself, isn't it? When you're conducting an experiment, when you're trying to see how a certain plan of behaviour works out, he keeps his kind of critical eye on his situation. He keeps his wisdom with him, he says. My wisdom stayed with me. But as he's observing this experiment, he denies himself nothing that his eyes desired. He refused his heart no pleasure. So pleasure is one method to live the good life. There are other methods that he embarks upon as well. We could aim for the satisfaction of wonderful achievements. Verse 4, I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. Human beings are capable of wonderful creations, beautiful gardens, beautiful works of engineering. Here they come together. A beautiful garden with an irrigation system to water it. Again, we have an imitation of the early chapters of Genesis. God, the great gardener, planting a garden in Eden with rivers to water it. And so here the teacher, a human being made in the image of God, also doing a similar kind of thing. But is it enough to find lasting meaning? That's the question being asked. The experiment continues into a third stage, verses 7 and 8, the pursuit of possessions, a pursuit which comes at the expense of others. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. Some people might look at verse 7 and think, aha, here's the Bible condoning slavery. Well, I'm not quite sure whether the end result really condones slavery, given the teacher determines that owning slaves is a form of meaninglessness. But this is an aspect of the teacher's experiment that we are familiar with, minus the slaves. But we've done pretty well with possessions here on the North Shore, haven't we? Here in Australia, at this point in history, we've done very well with possessions. But does it bring meaning? The teacher admits that temporarily some delight may be found in our hard work. There is some delight in getting an education. There is some benefit in getting an education. There is some delight we can take when we enjoy the fruit of our labour. He admits this. My heart took delight in all my labour, and this was the reward for all my toil. But does the joy last? The teacher's conclusion is no. Verse 11. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. The chasing after the wind, nothing was gained under the sun. None of these candidates were up to the task of bringing true, lasting meaning for the teacher. Now, why is that? Well, the reason why these things don't bring meaning is found in the very final verses of today's passage. Have a listen from verse 14. The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fool walks in the darkness. But I came to realise that the same fate overtakes them both. Then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this too is meaningless. For the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. Now, that's the reason that meaning can't be found in all these different avenues, because it's death which makes all these achievements redundant. We may shine brightly for 50, 60, 70, 80 years, but then even the brightest star must die eventually. The teacher hasn't been the only one to recognise this. The Australian singer-songwriter, Paul Kelly, recorded a song in 1989 called You Can't Take It With You. Here are some of the lyrics. You might have a happy family, nice house, fine car. You might be successful in real estate. You could even be a football star. You might have a primetime TV show seen in every home and bar, but you can't take it with you. You might have a body of fine proportion and a hungry mind, a handsome face and a flashing wit, lips that kiss and eyes that shine. There might be a queue all around the block long before your starting time, but you can't take it with you. And so the teacher says, if we long to find meaning, achievements that last, then death is the great denier. Death is the great denier. It's pretty depressing stuff, isn't it? And it would remain depressing if Ecclesiastes was the only book in the Bible. But it's not the only book in the Bible. He does us a great service by taking us some of the way. But in order to go all the way to work out what the Bible teaches us about true meaning, we need to look beyond the boundaries of Ecclesiastes. In the New Testament, the Bible speaks at length about our resurrection from the dead. The teacher in Ecclesiastes speaks about death being the great denier. But the rest of the Bible, particularly in the New Testament, talks about the resurrection being the great enabler of meaning. One of the places where the resurrection is spoken about at length is 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Paul begins by speaking about Christ's resurrection, and then he speaks about our resurrection, and then his conclusion of that discussion in the very final verse of that chapter, 1 Corinthians 15, verse 58, is this. He says, "Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm, let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labour in the Lord is not in vain. Ecclesiastes says, yes, it's in vain. Paul says, well, hang on. The resurrection teaches us that there is a type of work that is not in vain. The work that's done in the Lord. And the reason it's not in vain is because there is a resurrection coming, a resurrection around the corner. Those who trust in Jesus can expect to be raised from the dead. We can expect our work in the Lord to be seen and validated and celebrated in the age to come. This is how we find a meaning that lasts. To be busy for the Lord, to be investing in godly actions, to be investing in godly character, to be devoting ourselves to what we're doing here at church, speaking of Jesus, encouraging one another to stay the course, to stand firm in Jesus, to encourage one another to deepen our understanding of who Jesus is and what he's doing in the world. That is work that lasts. That is the work, to quote Russell Crowe in Gladiator, from the sublime to the ridiculous. That is the work that will echo in eternity. The work that's done in the Lord. The resurrection makes all the difference. And none of that is meaningless. What the teacher needs is a lesson with the teacher of teachers. That's what the teacher needs. The Lord Jesus himself. And friends, it's a lesson that we have learned, isn't it? A lesson that we have learned every time we hear of Jesus speak of the resurrection, every time we hear his apostles speak of the same. That's where meaning is found. Thank goodness for the teacher of Ecclesiastes, because he takes us right down to the very depths. But thank goodness for the rest of the Bible, because the rest of the Bible shows us the path out of it. In fact, the teacher in Ecclesiastes will give us hints, as he's done already. He'll give us hints as to where this path can be found. But the truest light on that path is found with the rest of Scripture. So let's not forget that lesson, and let's live truly meaningful lives